I'm here today to tell you about demand management, which is the kind of the second half or the corollary to sustainable mobility policy. You might have seen there was a lot of few headlines last November when we published a study into demand management of the 5 cities. So I'm here today to basically tell you what we're planning on doing in demand management nationally, regionally and locally, and what the future steps are. So could I have next slide, please? Thanks. So look, demand management is one of the 4 pillars of our transport objectives under climate action. We've got 4 main ways that we're going to deliver our 51% goal. So one is sustainable mobility policy that Gareth's just been talking about, increasing the blend of renewable biofuels in our petrol and diesel, moving quite a significant proportion of our transport to electric modes or even zero emission modes. And then lastly, once we've kind of ticked all of those boxes, we've got people onto active travel and public transport, we've got people into electric vehicles, we were reducing the pollution from our petrol and diesel because of renewable biofuels. That still leaves us with quite a lot of a gap to target on our 51% target for carbon emissions reduction. And really the option we have left is reducing travel demand, and particularly here on the climate action plan, it's reducing the car kilometres driven by ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles. Next slide, please. So this slide really just brings us through the key mitigation measures that were included in CAP21. So you've got on the first row there, it's the electrification of the fleet. So you've got 2025 up to 2030. And you can see there that really the electrification of the fleet will actually bear the biggest degree of burden in reducing our emissions by 2030. The second row is talking about sustainable renewable fuels, so increasing our biofuels blends. So the ambition is by 2025 we'll have a biofuel blend of 12% in diesel, 10% in petrol, and by 2030 hopefully getting to 20% in diesel and 10% in petrol, and that then takes us down another 1.17 megaton. And then the third one really is combining the sustainable travel trips. So we're looking at 500,000 additional daily sustainable trips per day by 2030. And then the corollary of that is, and at the same time, to reduce our ICE car kilometres now by a minimum of 10%. The maximum 25% is really in brackets because that's not our target at the moment. But you'll see on the bottom row that we're missing 0.9 of a megaton of carbon. So one of our actions this year is to undertake a further program of work. We think we know what we can deliver through electric vehicles. We know what we can deliver through biofuels. We know what we can deliver through our additional daily sustainable travel trips, and with a 10% reduction in ICE car kilometres. With all of that, that gives us a gap to target of 0.9 megatons of carbon still left to find a pathway. And the max 25% is if all of that went on to travel demand, you would be looking at taking out 25% of ICE trips, which is obviously a really, really high bar. So I don't think that's likely, but it's more to point out that the 10% reduction that we have in CAP21 is not the target, it's the minimum amount we need to deliver. It's quite likely that we'll come up with a target later on this year, which is higher than 10%. But that 10% is a floor that we need to achieve, not the ceiling. Next slide, please. So then focusing in on demand management, what are our actions? The actions we've had in the 2021 Climate Action Plan that was published earlier this year was 250A, to examine the role of demand management measures in Irish cities, including low emission zones and parking pricing policies. And that was, the action there was to publish the findings of the demand management study, which is the cover here, 5 cities demand management report. It's online, it's 170 pages of a riveting read, so recommend you go through that. And then following on from that first one, which is now done, and these next 2 are really over to be delivered in part over the next year, but with reporting in both cases by Q4 2022. So the next one is to have a consider about, well, what are the national regulatory barriers that there might be to delivering demand management measures? So we will have a national government review, not all of these on the transport side, a lot are on planning, some on pricing and taxation. So we'll have a cross-governmental high-level review of the regulatory barriers that remain. and the work stream and proposals where these can be addressed and removed over the coming years. And then the last one is really where today's presentation comes in. And if you think of 2050B as thinking about what the national barriers are, 2050-258B is really about identifying a local pathway at a local level to deliver demand management measures. So some of the actions in the 5 cities report which we published were about national measures, so thinking about progressive taxation, delivery of the national planning framework, improving and enhancing the transport appraisal process, which actually colleagues of ours in the strategic research side will be presenting to you shortly on. But that's all work that will be done at a national governmental level. And the third one here is really about, well, if we're implementing demand management measures across the country, what does this look like? What does this look like at the local level, at the regional level? And can we develop a pathway across the regional level in the first instance to delivering demand management out by 2030? Next slide, please. So the 5 cities demand management study, as I said, is the first one of those. It was published in November. I'm going to just quickly take you through some of the high level findings in that, and then obviously for further information, you can refer to the report online. Next slide, please. So the 5 cities demand management study was actually commissioned in 2019. It came out of the CAP 2019, and it was a study that was developed not just to look at carbon emissions, but to look at how you could use demand management to achieve 4 different aims within our urban areas. Managing vehicular congestion, there's a huge amount of economic cost of congestion, and it's increasing year on year in our cities, so that was one aim. Reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from road traffic, so that feeds directly into the Climate Action Plan. Improving the quality of the urban environment, so this is about reallocating road space, not having 2-3 lanes of vehicles coming in and out of cities, but actually making our cities more livable. And addressing air quality issues due to vehicular traffic congestion. So again, carbon emission, we have very tight targets for. We have our 51% demand reduction target by 2030. But as well as carbon emissions, there's local air quality issues coming out of our vehicles through NOx and SOx, and improving local air quality will actually have a very significant impact on the life and health of our citizens. So that was the 4th of the study objectives. So it's a research study really, and based around how can you use travel demand to deliver each of these 4 objectives in the 5 main cities in Ireland. Next slide, please. So the approach that was taken was through avoid, shift, improve, and then manage. So the measures really were examined through this frame. And if you consider the first one about system efficiency, it's about the planning system, it's about land use and access to services. So a lot of the presentations we've heard, in the things that have been touched on in the earlier presentations, such as the 10-minute city and neighbourhood, that would come in the system efficiency. Then we have the travel efficiency, which is about actually making the best use of our travel network and travel system. So shifting to more sustainable modes. And again, if we have our 10-minute neighbourhoods, then obviously, you don't need a car to get around. You have easy access through sustainable active travel modes or through high quality public transport to most of the services you need within 10 minutes. So it follows on directly from that. And then the measures that were included, things like parking controls, pushing mobility management, mobility as a service, car clubs, more sustainable transport, and public transport incentives. Then the next one is improving the technology in the vehicles that we drive. So this is about actually, we've reduced the need to travel. We've then shifted some of that travel to public and active travel. Then for the trips that maybe still need to be made by car, that we're looking at more efficient and cleaner car transport. So we're looking at clean technologies, zero emission technologies, and using our planning and our taxation system to incentivize these. And then lastly, even once you've done all that, there will still remain polluting vehicles in the fleet. So at that point, that's when we come in with traffic controls, smart parking, dynamic tolling to actually reduce demand. And I guess if we're thinking about it in carrots and sticks here, the first 3 are really carrots, I think. It's about improving our systems, making sustainable travel modes more attractive, improving the technology of our vehicles. So these are all kind of the positive things. And then the last one, when all else has failed and we still have some congestion and some polluting car trips in there, it's about using demand measures, more stick-like measures to take those remaining trips out. Next slide, please. So the 5 cities study took this tiered measures approach, and I should say it was based on qualitative assessments through discussions with local planners and local operators within towns and cities, and people working in executives, in councils, and then also quantitative modelling. And through all that, they came up with the tiered measures approach. So the tier 1 were measures that have been examined at our national and individual city level and combined to inform these strategic pillars. And where this was possible, they have also been further refined and assessed using the NTA's regional modelling system. Then in tier 2, we have 2 sets of toolkits. One is the national toolkit. So this is the national level measures, so looking at taxation, looking at the regulatory barriers and removing those at a national level, and looking at progressive taxation and incentivization of better vehicles. But then tier 2B, which is the city toolkit, is really those demand management measures that can be implemented at a local level. So that's things like reallocation of road space, moving road space across to public transport, walking and cycling, implementing parking controls, things like that. So there's flexibility across, and the 2 of those toolkits combined will make the demand management measures that we deliver nationally by 2030. Next slide, please. So the delivery roadmap, and really this is just to say that, at demand management, we're at the very start of the journey here. We've got a really good research and modelling report that kind of assesses what's feasible, what will work well in different cities, and there's some really useful findings coming out of that. And it tiers the strategic pillars 1 to 11. So at the very top, we have 15-minute neighbourhoods. So actually, if we can deliver 10-minute neighbourhoods in the Southern Assembly region, that's fantastic, because that's even, going above what was modelled in the study. So that's a kind of a local national level. And then national planning framework delivery management, that's obviously a national level. These are the avoiding. Then we move to shift. So it's talking about public parking controls, improving our transport appraisal system, things like workplace parking levy, and also all of the sustainable travel and road reallocation would come in that. Then we have improving, and we're looking at alternative fuel vehicle support and taxation in there. And then lastly, the managing. So looking at things like delivering clean air zones or air quality zones within our urban centres, and then congestion charging. And these are really around the longer term. Congestion charging there, I know is short term. That doesn't mean it's going to be implemented very quickly. That means that a feasibility study would be done in the short term to see how it could be delivered in places like Dublin and Cork. Next slide, please. So look, that's a kind of a whistle-stop tour around the 5 cities demand management study, and I guess what we're going to do with it now. So by the end of 2022, as flagged earlier, we have 2 key actions in the CAP. One will be, we'll be leading on a cross-governmental review of the regulatory barriers. And then the second one will be hopefully a partnership approach between ourselves and working with the NTA and the regional assemblies to identify pathways for the implementation of demand management measures. Next slide, please. So then thinking about where we will be by the end of 2022, at this point next year, what will we have and how will we take this forward? We should have hopefully a regional / local framework, because I think that this has to be built from the local level upwards to develop and implement demand management measures out to 2030. What we're looking for there is really, we have the toolkits from the 5 cities study, and that's been a very useful study in terms of saying, well, this is what we think these will look like, this is what we think these will deliver. What we now need really to do is to get into a kind of communication at a regional and local level and have a look. So particularly say for the southern region, where you have 3 of the 5 cities in there. If these measures are implemented within the cities, there's obviously going to be knock-on impacts on the towns, villages, other conurbations around these cities, and on the interurban roads going in and out across the region. So rather than say looking at the three cities in isolation, it's more about developing an approach for the region that implements demand management measures in Waterford, Cork and Limerick, but then also says, well, hang on a minute, what about the other major towns in the region? What do we do here? How do we manage our interurban traffic flows? And ideally, with the modelling support that we will have kind of behind you on this, we will be able to do a bit more detailed analysis at that regional level to say, well, look, this is what this will look like. This is what this mixture of measures implemented at this regional level would deliver by 2030. And I guess the key thing for us from the department is what we need is that each of the regions delivers a minimum of a 10% reduction in ICE car kilometres. So we'll need the modelling to do that as well. Say, well, look, these are the measures that will be introduced, whether it's parking controls, whether it's sustainable mobility and reallocation of road space to this. It's delivering the 10-minute neighbourhood maybe across the region so that all of the major towns can have that around them as a planning goal. And then with that, well, what does that give us? Does that give us an 8% reduction in car kilometres? What else might we need to get to 10%? Or if we find, say, at the end of 2022, that demand management needs to go above the 10%, maybe to a 15% reduction, what do we need there to implement? And the idea then is that we'll have one of those for each of the regions, and that will give us a pathway to a national delivery of demand management by 2030. And further into 2040, but of course by 2030 we need to know that we're hitting that cap target. And then separately we will have supporting alongside that work stream, we'll have the high level study published of what the regulatory barriers are and how these need to be taken forward. So alongside the regional framework for implementation, we'll have a work stream at central government level to introduce legislation or statutory instruments to remove those regulatory barriers and to enable implementation of demand management measures at local level throughout the country. Next slide, please.